Welcome to Starbound. My name's the Voice Ogre, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new stories of Sunspire Academy, which I happen to do, and Freyrin and Rimiki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now, let's get into today's story. Henry Tanner sat alone in the control room of Deep Space Mining Rig number 47, also known as the Headache, smoking a cigarette that violated at least 4 company regulations. The cramped metal box floating somewhere in the asteroid belt of the Epsilon Eridani system wasn't much, but for 11 months of the year, it was home. Reminder: smoking is prohibited in all areas of Deep Space Mining Rig number 47. Chirped the station's artificial intelligence in a voice designed by psychology experts to sound pleasant and non-threatening. They had failed spectacularly on both counts.
"Blow it out your capacitor,"
Henry muttered, flipping another page in his dog-eared fishing magazine. The pages were real paper, yellowed and fraying at the edges. Henry had brought it from Earth 6 years ago, when he first signed on with Extra Helios Mining Corporation. He'd read it cover to cover perhaps 300 times. He knew every word, every picture caption, every fishing lure advertisement by heart. He kept reading it anyway. The console in front of him blinked with maintenance alerts that he was deliberately ignoring. The number 3 drill bit was overheating again. The carbon dioxide scrubbers in Sector 7 were operating at 82% efficiency, below the company's mandated 85% minimum. The waste recycling system needed a filter change.
"Screw 'em all,"
Henry said to nobody. The night shift was his kingdom, and in his kingdom, problems could wait until he finished his cigarette and his reading. Reminder: all maintenance alerts require immediate attention according to Extra Helios Mining Corporation protocols. The AI responded.
"Reminder, go to hell,"
Henry said. The AI, not programmed for theological discussion, remained silent. Henry rubbed absently at his chest, where the familiar tightness had settled in like an unwelcome houseguest. He reached into his pocket for the orange plastic bottle, tipped a small white pill into his palm, and swallowed it dry. The label read Alprazolam, Henry T. Take as needed for anxiety. The bottle was nearly empty. Anxiety had been Roy's constant companion since he was 8 years old, when he watched his father's refinery explode from the playground of East Houston Elementary School. The doctors called it generalized anxiety disorder with panic features. Henry called it Tuesday and Wednesday and every other day ending in Y. Funny thing about chronic anxiety, after 42 years, it became something like an old friend. A terrible, unwanted friend who shows up uninvited and ruins everything, but familiar nonetheless. Henry had tried therapy twice, both times ending when the therapist suggested he open up about his feelings. Henry figured his feelings were nobody's business but his own. Thank you very much. The pills helped. So did the cigarettes. So did the isolation of the night shift. 7 light minutes from the nearest human being who wasn't currently asleep in the crew quarters. 6 other souls on this tin can, and all of them unconscious. Just how Henry liked it. Extra Helios kept cutting corners. Fewer crew members each year, older equipment, longer deployments. When Henry first signed on, there had been 20 people on the Headache. Now, there were 7, doing the work for 20, for the pay for 5. The proximity alarm blared, a sound Henry had heard exactly twice in 6 years. Once during a meteor shower, and once during a surprise inspection from corporate. Approaching vessel detected, the AI announced, as if Henry couldn't read the flashing alert on his screen. Unable to identify configuration, no transponder signal detected, no response to automated hails.
"It's probably pirates,"
Henry muttered, setting down his magazine.
"Or it's corporate trying to catch me smoking."
Either possibility was equally unwelcome. According to protocol, Henry should wake Captain Thompson. According to Roy's personal philosophy, Captain Thompson was an insufferable prick who needed his beauty sleep more than Henry needed his useless advice.
"Continue hailing,"
Henry told the AI.
"I'm gonna take a look."
He grabbed his maintenance toolkit. a heavy metal box filled with wrenches, diagnostic tools, and other implements that could double as weapons in a pinch, and headed for the observation deck. The toolkit clanked against his leg as he moved through the corridors. The sound echoed off metal walls. The observation deck was a generous name for what amounted to a reinforced porthole with a small platform in front of it. Henry planted his feet and peered out into the void. What he saw didn't match any vessel design in the catalog. It didn't look like a vessel at all, really. More like a cloud or a fog bank, faintly visible against the backdrop of stars. It shifted and rolled, contracting and expanding as if breathing. There was something deliberate in its movements, something that made the hairs on Roy's neck stand up.
Well, ain't that just peculiar?
He drawled, reaching for the emergency alert panel. Whatever this thing was, it warranted waking the others. Before his fingers touched the panel, the lights flickered and died. The constant hum of the station systems, so omnipresent that Henry usually didn't even notice it, faded to silence. For 3 heartbeats, there was nothing but darkness and the sound of Roy's breathing. Then the emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red light. The gravity fluctuated momentarily, a sickening lurch that made Roy's stomach flip. He gripped the railing with white knuckles until the sensation passed.
Status report.
Henry barked, but the AI didn't respond. The emergency systems were running on minimal power, life support, gravity, basic illumination. Non-essentials like the overly cheerful AI have been temporarily sacrificed. Henry pulled his handheld radio from his belt.
This is Tanner. Anybody copy?
Static answered him.
Thompson. Rawlings. Anybody?
More static.
Typical.
Henry growled, shoving the radio back onto his belt. He'd have to wake the crew manually. He picked up his toolkit and headed toward the residential section, trying to ignore the growing knot in his gut that wasn't entirely due to anxiety. The corridors seemed longer in the red emergency lighting, the shadows deeper at the corners. Henry had never been afraid of the dark. There were too many real things to be afraid of, but something about the current darkness felt wrong, like the shadows had weight and intention. He was halfway to the crew quarters when he noticed the mist seeping through a ventilation grate in the ceiling. Thin tendrils of pale vapor curled out into the corridor, twisting in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Henry stopped, toolkit raised defensively. His engineering mind ran through possibilities. Coolant leak? No. Wrong color and consistency. Fire suppression system malfunction? The foam would be visible, and the alarms would be sounding. Some kind of atmospheric contamination? The mist thickened, pooling on the floor and then rising up, forming a vaguely humanoid shape about 7 feet tall. It had no distinct features, just swirls and eddies suggesting limbs and a head. Henry felt a spike of fear, a shot of adrenaline that made his heart pound against his ribs. Then, strangely, the fear subsided. The pill was working. Or maybe his anxiety-hardened brain simply couldn't process any of the additional fear stimuli. Whatever the reason, Henry Tanner stood his ground as the mist being approached. The creature moved with fluid grace, gliding rather than walking. It stopped about 3 feet from Henry and seemed to study him, though it had no visible eyes. Then it extended what might have been an arm and released a cloud of sickly green vapor directly into Roy's face. Henry inhaled involuntarily, bracing for pain or disorientation. Instead, his nostrils filled with familiar scent, an acrid chemical smell that triggered an immediate memory response. Summer evenings in East Houston, the air thick with refinery emissions, the peculiar bouquet of petroleum derivatives, sulfur compounds, and industrial solvents.
Smells like home,
Henry said with a chuckle.
Hell, It smells better than the refinery back in Houston on a humid day.
The mist being recoiled, its form rippling in what Henry somehow interpreted as confusion. It tried again, releasing a more concentrated dose of the green vapor. Henry took a deliberate, deep breath this time, analyzing the scent like a wine connoisseur.
Well, we got notes of benzene with subtle hints of sulfur dioxide and a touch of ethylene oxide, he said. It's missing that special Harris County formaldehyde finish, though.
The mist being withdrew further, its form becoming less stable, rippling with what Henry was increasingly certain was agitation. Henry used that moment of confusion to swing the heavy toolkit through the creature's misty form. The metal box passed through with minimal resistance, dispersing the vapor temporarily. The mist quickly began to reform, but Henry was already moving, running toward the engineering station where he could barricade himself and think. His mind raced through possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. Hallucination? No, the emergency power situation was real. Some kind of defense system from the asteroid they were mining. Possible, but the asteroid had shown no signs of technology or artificial structures. Actual, honest-to-God aliens. The most outlandish theory, and yet, increasingly, the most likely. Henry reached the crew quarters, breathless more from the unaccustomed exercise than from fear. The door slid open at his approach. At least the basic systems were still functioning, revealing a horrifying sight. Nothing. The 6 bunks were empty, the personal effects of his crewmates scattered about as if they'd been interrupted in the middle of sleep. No blood, no signs of struggle, no bodies, just emptiness. The captain's tablet lay on his bunk, still powered on. Henry snatched it up and saw it was displaying security footage from the crew quarters, time-stamped 1 hour earlier. The footage showed the sleeping crew, unaware of danger. Then, mist pouring from the vents, forming into shapes that surrounded each person. The shapes engulfed the sleepers, who didn't even wake up before they disappeared. The footage ended there.
Son of a bitch,
Henry whispered, feeling a flicker of genuine fear for his colleagues. It was quickly replaced by determination. The pills, the cigarettes, the decades of living with constant low-grade panic. They had trained him for this moment. While others might surrender to terror, Henry Tanner was already acquainted with its company. He nodded to it like an old friend and got to work. In the engineering bay, Henry barricaded the door with a heavy equipment locker. He accessed the main computer terminal, sent an emergency distress signal, doubting anyone would reach them in time, but protocol was protocol, and then began researching the rig's defensive capabilities. These were minimal, to put it kindly. Deep space mining operations weren't exactly military installations. There was a fire suppression system, emergency evacuation pods, and maintenance tools. Henry would have to improvise. As he worked, the ambient temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Mist began seeping under the door, pooling on the floor and slowly rising. Henry worked faster. He grabbed a fuel cell used for the mining drones, a pressure sprayer from the maintenance supplies, and several lengths of pipe and tubing. 90 seconds of focused engineering yielded a crude but functional flamethrower. Just in time, as the mist had formed into 3 distinct beings that now surrounded him.
All right, fellas,
Henry said, flicking his cigarette lighter to ignite the pilot flame on his makeshift weapon.
Let's see if you like fire as much as I like your fancy perfume.
He squeezed the trigger, sending a jet of flame through the nearest mist being. The creature emitted a high-pitched sound that might have been pain and rapidly dispersed, the mist retreating from the heat. The other 2 beings also backed away.
You don't like fire, huh? Join the club.
Henry grinned, feeling more alive than he had in years. Normally, his anxiety would be spiking in dangerous situations, but instead he felt strangely calm. The mist being's green vapor seemed to be having the opposite of its intended effect on him. Rather than increasing his fear, it was somehow damping it down. Some quirk of brain chemistry, perhaps, or maybe just the familiar smell giving him an anchor in the chaos. Henry fought his way out of engineering and toward the communications hub. More mist beings formed around him, each releasing increasingly potent doses of the green vapor. Each time, Henry inhaled deeply and felt nothing but a familiar chemical burn in his nostrils.
"Keep it coming, boys," he taunted. "This one reminds me of spring break in Jersey." That was scary.
The communications hub was undamaged but showed signs of tampering. The control panel had been reconfigured in ways that made no sense to human engineering principles. Henry accessed the transmission logs and found something disturbing. The hub had been used to send multiple data bursts within the last hour, using the rig's own equipment, but in formats Henry didn't recognize. He pulled up the transmission data, trying to make sense of the alien communications. Most of it was incomprehensible, but the visual components were clear enough. Star maps highlighting populated human worlds, with particular focus on major cities. Earth featured prominently, with every major population center marked.
"That can't be good,"
Henry muttered. Further investigation of the logs revealed that one of the rig's escape pods had been jettisoned shortly after the crew's disappearance. The aliens were already on their way to Earth, with the mining rig serving as merely a first contact point. Henry accessed the ship's research logs, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. He found a file from Dr. Rawlings, the rig's science officer, dated 2 weeks earlier.
"We've detected unusual energy readings from Section 47C of the asteroid," Rawlings had written. "The readings don't match anything in our database, suggesting some kind of exotic material or possibly even artificial structure embedded deep within the rock. Captain Thompson authorized drilling to begin tomorrow." Simpson made a joke about waking up ancient space gods, and now I can't get it out of my head. Intellectually, I know we're just going to find some unusual mineral formation, but still, this far from Earth, the mind plays tricks on you.
Henry remembered the incident. The drilling had hit something strange, a cavity inside the asteroid that their instruments couldn't properly analyze. There had been a power fluctuation, some weird readings, and then everything went back to normal. They'd all forgotten about it, focusing on meeting their quotas.
"We woke something up?"
Henry said to the empty room. Another file caught his attention. This one, a partial AI translation of symbols found inside the asteroid cavity. The translation was speculative at best, but certain phrases stood out. The harvest, the feeding, the sleep between worlds. Henry pieced together a grim picture. The mist beings, the harvest in their own language, appeared to feed on fear-induced hormones from sentient species. They used their fear gas to paralyze victims with terror before extracting these chemicals directly from their brains. The process was usually fatal, though complete extraction took time. The beings had done this across multiple worlds, leaving husks of entire civilizations behind.
"And now they're headed to Earth?"
Henry said grimly.
All-you-can-eat buffet.
A new thought struck him. The aliens hadn't killed him because they couldn't understand why their fear toxin didn't work on him. They were studying him, trying to figure out the anomaly. He could use this to his advantage. Henry formulated a plan. He'd get to an escape pod, catch up to the alien's mothership, and sabotage it before it reached Earth. Not exactly the retirement plan he had in mind, but then again, his 401k wasn't looking too healthy anyway.
"I always figured anxiety would kill me,"
Henry muttered as he gathered supplies for his mission.
Never thought it might save the world instead.
Navigating through the rig was a game of cat and mouse, with Henry avoiding or fighting mist beings as necessary. His knowledge of the station's layout and systems gave him an edge. He could cut power to sections, redirect airflow to disperse the mist, and use maintenance shafts too narrow for the beings to follow efficiently. He talked to himself constantly as he moved, a habit from years of working mostly alone.
I'll make it back. First thing I'm doing is getting a real cheeseburger. None of this synthesized protein crap they serve here. Real beef, real cheese, a real heart attack waiting to happen.
At the escape pod bay, Henry found a scene that confirmed his worst fears. Of the rig's 4 escape pods, one is already gone. The aliens' advanced team heading to Earth. The other 2 had been deliberately damaged, their control systems destroyed. Only one remained operational, and it was being guarded by the largest concentration of mist beings yet. They were expecting him.
Of course it wouldn't be easy.
Henry sighed.
That never is.
He studied the situation, formulating a plan. Direct confrontation wouldn't work. There were too many of them. He needed a diversion. Henry made his way to the environmental control station adjacent to the pod bay. There, he overrode the safety protocols and triggered the fire suppression system throughout the entire rig. Alarms blared as foam and water sprayed from ceiling nozzles in every section, creating chaos. Using the confusion to his advantage, Henry rushed through the pod bay doors, his makeshift flamethrower clearing a path through the disoriented mist beings. He reached the escape pod and slapped the entry control, diving inside as the door slid open. Within the pod, a final mist being confronted him. This one was different, more substantial, more defined. It had taken on a shape that approximated human features, though the details were wrong in subtle, disturbing ways. It looked like you were looking at a reflection of a human in a funhouse mirror. The being spoke, using sounds that had copied the rig's announcement system, creating a patchwork of the AI's voice. Human, different, not afraid. Why not afraid? Henry edged toward the pod's control console, keeping his flamethrower trained on the being.
Just built different, I guess. Why are you headed to Earth?
The being's form rippled, perhaps its version of a shrug. Hunger, feed, humans, perfect. Fear chemicals, delicious.
Yeah, we're a pretty nervous bunch,
Henry admitted, reaching the console and beginning the launch sequence while maintaining eye contact with the being.
Anxiety, depression, panic disorders, we got it all. Regular pharmacological smorgasbord.
You different. No fear. Want study.
I'm flattered, really, but I got a better idea.
Roy's finger hovered over the launch button.
How about you all stay the hell away from my planet?
Too late. Advanced team already go. Mothership follow. Billions feed. Great harvest.
We'll see about that.
Henry hit the launch button. The pod shuddered as clamps released and thrusters fired, jolting them away from the mining rig. The sudden movement seemed to disorient the mist being momentarily. Henry took advantage, grabbing a fire extinguisher from the wall and discharging it directly into the creature's form. The cold carbon dioxide spray disrupted its molecular cohesion, and the being dispersed into wisps that were quickly sucked into the pod's air filtration system. With the immediate threat neutralized, Henry focused on piloting. The pod sensors detected the alien's mothership, a massive, translucent structure that resembled a cloud more than a vessel. Already moving toward Earth's solar system, Henry set an intercept course, pushing the escape pod's engines beyond their recommended limits.
Just hold it together, baby,
he muttered to the straining craft.
Just long enough to save the world, then you can fall apart all you want.
Hours passed as Henry pursued the alien vessel. The escape pod wasn't built for extended journeys, and certainly not for the speeds Henry was coaxing from its overtaxed engines. Warning lights flashed on the console, which Henry studiously ignored. The pod would either hold it together or it wouldn't. Worrying about it wouldn't change the outcome. He used the time to study the aliens using the AI collated data he downloaded from the rig. The mist beings existed in a state somewhere between gas and liquid, able to alter their density at will. They communicated primarily through chemical signals. Essentially, they talked by smell. Their fear toxin was actually a byproduct of their natural communication method, evolved specifically for hunting sentient prey. Most fascinating was their life cycle. The beings spent centuries in a dormant state, awakening only when potential food sources were detected nearby. Their mothership wasn't technology as humans understood it. It was a biological construct, an extension of their collective consciousness.
Great,
Henry muttered.
I'm not even fighting aliens. I'm fighting a giant space fart with an attitude problem.
The sensors beeped, indicating he was approaching the mothership. Henry killed the engines and drifted into the final distance, using the pod's minimal stealth capabilities to avoid immediate detection. Up close, the mothership was even more unsettling. A vast cloud that pulsated with internal movements, like a thunderstorm seen from within. There was no obvious entry point, no docking bay or airlock. Henry donned the pod's only EVA suit and prepared the mining laser, a tool designed for cutting through asteroid rock that would hopefully work on whatever the mothership was made of. He'd have one shot at this. Either he'd find a way inside or he would die in the vacuum of space.
Here goes nothing,
Henry said, and fired the laser at the closest part of the mothership's outer membrane. The beam cut through surprisingly easily, creating a hole about a meter wide. The membrane didn't decompress explosively like a conventional hull breach. Instead, it reacted like a wound, the edges curling inward as if in pain. Henry guided the pod closer and prepared for extravehicular activity.
Now if I don't come back,
he told the pod's rudimentary AI,
you tell everyone. Actually, never mind, no one cares what I had to say anyway.
He pushed off from the pod and floated toward the breach, using the suit's maneuvering thrusters for guidance. As he passed through the opening, he felt resistance, like moving through thick syrup, before emerging into the interior of the alien vessel. Inside, Henry found himself in a vast, cavernous space, filled with swirling mist and strange organic structures. The atmosphere read as breathable air on the suit's sensors, though heavily saturated with the same chemicals that comprise the alien's fear toxin. To a normal human, the air would be paralyzing. To Roy, it just was. He removed his helmet, taking a deep breath of the alien atmosphere. The chemical taste was stronger here, burning his throat slightly, but otherwise caused no ill effects. If anything, he felt almost euphoric, a strange calm settling over him. His anxious brain, flooded with familiar smelling chemicals, was responding as it had been trained to do over decades of medication, by dampening its own fear response. Henry moved through the ship, using the suit's thrusters to navigate in the minimal gravity. The interior was unlike any vessel he'd ever seen. No corridors or compartments, just a continuous, open space with areas of varying density and function. The mist beings moved through it all, some taking humanoid form, while others remained as simple clouds. None seemed to notice him immediately. Perhaps they couldn't conceive of a human entering their environment voluntarily. Or perhaps the high concentration of fear toxin in his body made him smell like one of them. Deep in the ship, Henry discovered what appeared to be storage chambers, translucent sacks hanging from the organic ceiling structure. Inside each sack was a humanoid figure suspended in misty fluid. Henry recognized missing crew members from the mining rig, along with other beings that weren't human, victims from previous worlds. They were alive but catatonic, hooked up to devices that resembled organic tubes, extracting something from their brains. Henry moved closer to the sack containing Captain Thompson, studying the extraction mechanism. It appeared to be drawing a specific chemical from the man's cerebral cortex, the physical manifestation of fear. Henry used the mining laser at its lowest setting to carefully cut open Thompson's sack. The fluid drained away, leaving the captain suspended in the organic restraints. Henry cut these as well, catching Thompson as he slumped forward.
Captain? Thompson? Can you hear me?
Thompson's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widening in recognition.
Tanner. Tanner? Where are we? We're inside the alien mothership,
Henry explained, helping Thompson orient himself in the low gravity.
They're harvesting fear chemicals from your brain, from everyone they've captured.
Thompson looked around, taking in the bizarre surroundings. How are you even functioning in this environment? The air, it's saturated with their paralytic agent.
Yeah, turns out a lifetime of anxiety meds and refinery fumes makes for a decent immunity, Henry said with a shrug. Fear gas smells like home to me. Doesn't do much except give me a slight buzz, actually.
Thompson processed the information with the rapid assessment of a career spacer.
Well, we need to free the others and get out of here before they reach Earth. No time, Henry said grimly. The advance team's already halfway there. This ship has to be stopped now.
Thompson winced, clutching his head.
While I was connected, I could hear them, somehow. They communicate through chemical signals, but when they're harvesting, there's a direct neural link. And what'd you learn? They call themselves the Harvest, and they've been doing this for millions of years, moving from world to world. Earth represents their biggest feast in millennia. Billions of sentient minds producing fear chemicals. They plan to release the fear toxin into the atmosphere of major cities simultaneously, paralyzing everyone before they feed. And how do we stop them? Henry asked.
Thompson pointed deeper into the ship.
There's a central chamber. It's what they call the Nexus. It's where the collective consciousness resides. Disrupt that, and the whole ship goes dormant. Can you make it back to the escape pod?
Thompson tested his limbs, wincing.
I think so. What about the others? Free as many as you can, Henry instructed. Get them to the pod, and I'll reach the Nexus, and I'll disable it somehow. How will you find your way back?
Henry tapped his suit's locator beacon.
You follow this signal, and if I'm not back in 30 minutes, you leave without me.
Thompson nodded grimly.
Good luck, Tanner.
I don't need luck, Henry replied.
Just need him to keep underestimating me.
Henry moved deeper into the alien vessel, following the increased density of mist toward what he presumed was the core. The architecture grew more defined, the organic structures more intricate. Mist beings passed him frequently now, some taking notice of his presence, others ignoring him completely. Those that did notice him reacted with what Henry interpreted as confusion, releasing clouds of greenish vapor, apparently their version of alarmed communication. Henry breathed it in without effect, continuing his journey toward the center of the ship. As he progressed, the mist beings began actively confronting him, forming humanoid shapes that blocked his path. They released increasingly concentrated forms of their toxins, which caused minor hallucinations, but still couldn't trigger the paralyzing fear they needed.
Sorry, boys,
Henry told one particularly persistent being.
I've been living with the worst-case scenario in my head every day for 42 years. Nothing you can show me tops what I've already imagined.
He pushed through the thickening resistance, using his flamethrower sparingly to conserve fuel. The heat disrupted the beings temporarily, allowing him to progress toward the core. Finally, Henry reached what had to be the Nexus, a pulsating organic chamber that housed thousands of mist beings in their natural state. They swirled around a central energy source that glowed with an unearthly light, pulsing in rhythm with the movements of the mist. This was clearly the heart of their collective consciousness, the central processor for the biological computer that was their mothership. Henry studied the chamber, applying his engineering expertise to deduce how it worked. The central energy source appeared to be a form of plasma contained within an organic matrix. The mist beings flowed through it and around it in complex patterns, seemingly programming it with their movements and chemical signals. As Henry began to formulate a plan for sabotage, the mist in the chamber coalesced, forming a massive collective entity that towered over him. Unlike the smaller beings he'd encountered, this one had detail. A face with approximations of eyes and a mouth, though still abstracted and alien.
Human,
it communicated, not through sound, but directly into Roy's mind.
You resist our fear. How?
I'm just lucky, I guess, Henry replied aloud. Or, unlucky, depending on how you look at it.
You will give us your secret. We will adapt. We will feed on all humans.
I had a bad feeling about today when I woke up, Henry said conversationally, slowly edging around the chamber as he spoke, looking for vulnerabilities. Happens a lot when you got chronic anxiety. Every day feels like something terrible's about to happen. The difference was today. I was right. The collective entity followed his movement, its misty form rippling with what might have been impatience.
Your mind is damaged, broken, but still useful. Surrender to study.
My mind's not broken, Henry countered. It's just customized, And I'm not surrendering anything except maybe this. He fired his flamethrower directly at the plasma core, but the flame dissipated before reaching its target, absorbed by the dense mist surrounding it.
Futile,
the entity communicated.
We control all within this vessel.
The collective entity made one final attempt to subdue him, forming a massive wave of mist that engulfed Henry completely. He felt a direct assault on his mind, the beings bombarding him with images of his worst fears, his father's death in the refinery explosion, replayed in excruciating detail, his failed marriages, the faces of his ex-wives contorted with disappointment and anger, the crushing loneliness of space stretching into infinity. And for the first time, Henry felt the toxin working as intended, breaking through his armor. Fear, true and visceral, began to rise in his chest. His breathing quickened. The familiar tightness squeezed his ribs like a vice. A panic attack. His old friend coming to visit at the worst possible moment. Fighting through the mental assault, Henry remembered something from the research files he studied. The mist beings could be affected by their own toxin if it was reflected back at them. They fed on fear, but had never evolved to experience it themselves. It was a feedback loop they had no defense against. Henry adjusted his plan. Instead of attacking the core directly, he would target the ship's atmospheric circulation system, the organic equivalent of air ducts that ran through the vessel. If he could collect and concentrate the fear toxin, then redirect it through the Nexus chamber, he might be able to create a fear feedback loop. The collective entity, sensing his resistance weakening, pressed its mental attack harder. Roy's vision blurred with panic, his hands shaking so badly he could barely operate his equipment. But decades of functioning despite anxiety had taught him one crucial skill: how to keep going, even when his brain was screaming at him to stop.
You want to know what's really scary?
Henry gasped, fighting for breath as he worked.
The thought that I've spent my whole life being afraid for nothing. That all the worry and the panic never protected me from anything. It was all just pointless.
He reached the circulation control node, an organic valve structure that regulated the flow of atmosphere throughout the ship. Using his mining tools and the remains of his flamethrower, Henry reconfigured it to collect the fear toxin from the entire ship and concentrate it.
But today,
he continued, speaking to the entity still attacking his mind.
Today, my fear might actually save everyone. It's funny how things work out.
With a final adjustment, Henry redirected the concentrated fear toxin through the core chamber, creating a feedback loop. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The collective entity shuddered, its form destabilizing. As it experienced fear for the first time, the unified consciousness fractured, individual mist beings separating and writhing in apparent agony. The mothership itself began to react, the organic walls contracting and relaxing rhythmically, like a heart in fibrillation. The plasma core flared with unstable energy, its rhythm disrupted by the panic of its controllers. Henry struggled to stay sane as the fear toxin concentration increased ever more. He activated his suit's oxygen supply and helmet, creating a temporary barrier.
It's time to go,
he muttered to himself, and began the journey back to the escape pod. Following his locator beacon through the increasingly chaotic interior of the dying mothership, the return journey was a nightmare of collapsing passages and panicked mist beings flailing blindly through the ship's interior. The vessel was literally coming apart at the seams, the organic structure decaying without the unified consciousness to maintain it. Henry pushed through, his own panic under tenuous control, focused solely on the blinking indicator of the escape pod's location. When he finally reached the breach point, he found Thompson waiting for him, along with 4 other crew members who had been successfully freed from the storage chambers.
"The ship's collapsing,"
Thompson shouted as Henry approached.
"I noticed,"
Henry shouted back.
"Where are the others?"
Thompson's expression was grim.
"Rawlings and Simpson were too far gone. The extraction process had already taken too much."
Henry nodded grimly.
"Let's go."
They piled into the escape pod, which detached from the mothership just as the major sections began to implode. The vast cloud ship collapsed in on itself, creating a spectacular but silent implosion that reduced it to a dense point of light that quickly faded. In the cramped escape pod heading back to Earth, Henry sat quietly as the rescued crew members celebrated their survival. His anxiety medication had long since worn off, and the familiar tightness was back in his chest. But somehow, it didn't bother him as much as usual. Captain Thompson made his way over, sitting heavily on the adjacent seat.
"So how'd you do it, Tanner?"
Henry showed him the empty anxiety medication bottle.
"I'm just used to it. I've been scared my whole damn life of one thing or another. And after a while, you just learn to work through it."
He looked out at the viewport and the stars, then at Earth growing larger in the distance.
"And besides, their fear gas smelled like home. It's hard to be scared of something that reminds you where you come from."
"What about the advance team? The ones heading to Earth?"
Without the mothership, they're just individuals. Dangerous, but manageable. Earth authorities can be warned. And besides, I've never encountered anyone like me before."
Henry smiled grimly.
"Turns out, humans aren't as easy to scare as they thought."
As they approached Earth's orbit, Henry started planning what he'd do with the hazard pay and probable promotion this incident would earn him. Maybe buy that fishing cabin in Montana he'd been dreaming about. Somewhere quiet, where the air was clean. A place where nothing smelled like refineries or fear gas or home. Then again, he might miss the smell after all these years. Anxiety had been his companion for so long. He wasn't sure who he'd be without it. The familiar enemy that had, in the end, helped him save humanity. The escape pod entered Earth's atmosphere. Henry at the controls, bringing everyone home safely. In the final moments before touchdown, he reflected that for a man who had spent his entire life managing fear, he'd finally found something scarier than his own thoughts. The extinction of humanity. And he faced it down. That was worth a satisfied smile as they made final approach.